Testing. Can you? Time. Okay, testing. I hope this is working. Let me know if you can hear me. Just give me a quick one in the chat. Good evening, everybody. I'm gonna make sure this is working. Can everybody hear me? Let me see. Let me know if you can hear me, please. I just need to make sure this is all good before I get started. I do not want to be wasting time today, so the sooner. Let me just check actually on the live link. Okay, seems like it's working. Perfect. Okay, perfect. Wi-Fi link is working fine too. Okay, so good evening, everybody, and to those of you who are going to watch this later. I'm going to just a couple of announcements before I get started. So I'm going to be doing slightly less of these lives. Not that I've been doing that many to begin with, but I'm going to move towards more pre-recorded stuff. Because I think some of the messages that I tried to do with this live thing, the live takes a lot of time to prepare. It's interactive. It's like managing a show. I think it's a lot more complicated to do. So I'm going to be doing a lot less of those and focusing more on pre-recorded stuff and then uploading it. Now, the purpose of I guess you call it a discussion today. The purpose of my discussion today is to talk really about the miseducation of the African. But I titled this show or this episode, this discussion, I entitled it the danger of a single story. Okay. When I say the danger of a single story, what I'm referring to quite specifically is the danger of one person giving us the narrative throughout the last 300 or 400 years. I think it's dangerous. I think it's problematic. And I think we don't even realize that it's a single story that has largely been dictating to us how we should be as a people, how we see ourselves as history, how we see our divisions. Maybe we don't even see our divisions, but ultimately a single story is the reason why we're in the place that we are. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit about that today. I'm going to ask you guys, I'm going to crave your indulgence today. I have some slides, and those slides are purely there for timestamps, to give me a reference for timestamps. So I'm only going to show you a quick slide, and then I'm going to be discussing. I'm going to be talking quite directly to you. So I've written down some notes throughout the course of this week, and really this is in regards to video I put out, short that I did from a live, which went viral. It's got over 1 million views at the moment, which is a good thing. But like in all things, the ignorance is shown at an astronomical level when the masses see it. I posted it on the community page. It was about how Africans see why Africans see race differently to African Americans and other people. And you know, it's funny. European people tend to get it. Some Africans in the diaspora get it. Some Africans on the continent get it. But for the most part, I would say probably about 75% of the people just don't get it. It still went viral, so who cares, right? But I think this is sort of the last time I want to touch on this topic. And this is really hopefully a topic that's going to be encouraging to all of us, okay? All right, so like I said, I'm going to be talking directly to you. So the first thing I want to talk about, in fact, even before I talk about that, the very first thing I want to mention to you is throughout the course of this show, I'm going to be using the word African and Black. And for the sake of confusion, I'm going to use African and Black interchangeably. So the way I will look at it, I will define African, the African as African would describe higher melanated, brown-skinned people, curly haired people, whose DNA is found in Africa prior to the 7th century AD. So prior to the Islamic invasion of Northern Africa. So if your DNA traces back, is similar to people from that region. It's not to say, and by the way, I'm not criticizing Arabs and white people who claim to be African. I'm purely talking about the indigenous of the continent, the indigenous of the world, but more specifically, people who trace their DNA back to people who existed in that same part of the continent prior to the 7th century AD. Not to say that there weren't some mixtures then, but largely the bulk of the population will trace their DNA back to before the Islamic invasion. Now, so like I said, I've got some notes and I'm just going to read off the notes and discuss them. So one thing we need to realize is history is written through the eyes of the victor. When I say the victor, there's a saying that we have in Africa. Until the lion has a historian, history will always be written from the point of view of the hunter. Okay, and I'll say it again. Until the lion has a historian, history is always going to be written from the point of view of the hunter. Winston Churchill also said, history is going to be kind to Great Britain. History is going to be kind to Great Britain because I'm going to write it. Okay, and these are very important statements that are made because history is never told from the point of view of the suppressed or the oppressed. I don't care how much social media we may have now. I don't care how much YouTube we may have. I don't care how much we may think we have freedom of speech. Ultimately, even your narrative is shaped by the victor, the person who controls you. We shut down our entire lives 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, 3 years ago. Everybody shut down their lives. Most places in the world shut down their lives because the people who are in positions of power and control chose to make it clear to us that this thing that we don't even see has overtaken us in this world, and everything that we call part of our daily existence has to shut down as a result. So history is written through the point of view of the victor. Now, how does this relate to us as African people? And again, for those of you who are just coming in, I'm using the word African and Black interchangeably to describe melanated, brown-skinned, curly-haired people whose DNA is found in Africa prior to the 7th century AD. We have to question all history. We have to question all history. We're in this habit now, unfortunately, actually, that it's not just that we question all history, but we question all history without any real factual history. The history that existed prior to the Google history that existed where you had to go through an encyclopedia, you had to go and find first, primary, secondary sources, what they said, and then make a judgment. That history is almost relegated to the background. Now we have people that will come on and fabricate history. History, though, what we should be clear about, history is in itself political. History is in itself a political tool. For those of you who have studied Egyptology prior to the 1950s, 1960s, Egyptology is written from the point of view of it's a political position they have taken. They are still taking that same political position. They're still taking that political position when they talk about Africa. It's only now when we are starting to decolonize our textbooks, even on the continent, to talk about things like slavery and colonialism being bad things. Because remember, at independence in many countries, particularly countries controlled by the British, our judiciary and our education system was largely controlled, was still programmed, firstly by the missionaries, and that missionary education went into the colonial education, and that is what has educated many of us. Again, I've talked about this numerous times on this show. When I was growing up in Nigeria in primary school, we didn't have a subject called history. Most people who grew up in the 80s and the 90s will attest to that, let alone the people that existed before. Okay, so these are problems that we face. But history is within itself political. We must question it. So we must question it. So what people are doing on social media and so on is fine, but you question it the right way. All history is also propaganda. If you know even just the story of Hitler, he had a man called Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels' job was to go and use cinema of the time to go and depict Germany a certain way. If Germany had succeeded in the Second World War, those books would have gone and programmed the world's point of view about Germany. But because Britain and America and those allies won, the history is programmed from their point of view. Likewise with African history. The history has been propagandized for at least 3 centuries to show that Africans are below. And we have internalized this, and it's created a bigger problem. And that's why me, myself, I don't even consider myself a historian. Whenever people say, oh, you do historical documentaries, you're a historian. No. I am a dramatist. I am not a historian. I am a dramatist. So essentially, I take a point of view of history. In a way, there's a certain amount of drama you add to it to tell the story. I do that with my films. I do that with my documentaries. I'm here to be a dramatist, not a historian. Oliver Stone also considers himself a dramatist. He writes from the point of view of, I suppose, the left's history. Okay, that's what he sort of does. But we have to also acknowledge that between the 18th and the 20th century, historians were largely propagandists. Turn it on, put it on silent. Historians in the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries were largely propagandists. So they would do their research, but instead of acknowledging the information, instead of telling it as it is, they will go and say things at the University of London to people like Ivan van Sertima, who wrote They Came Before Columbus. They told him, you come from a people who have no history. This is what they're telling us. So they used the propaganda that was pervasive at the time, which is the propaganda of the African people being of smaller minds, lesser ability than the white man. And this is what we've carried through the years. So I want to make that point very, very clear. The second thing I want to talk about is the reality of our recent past. When I say recent past can go back 1,000 years, you go back 2,000 years. Really, we're talking about the time when the last 500 or 600 years. We're not going as far back as that, because yes, if we look at the most recent past that we had, we are talking about the period of the colonial and the enslavement era. Granted, we know that. Guys, give me a 1 in the chat, by the way, if you can hear this clearly, please. I want to ensure that we can that everybody's seeing me and understanding what's going on. Okay, so if you're there, give me a 1 in the chat, please. Anyway, let me continue while you do that. Hopefully it's working. So the reality of our recent plight as African people, okay, you have to acknowledge that Black people, we do not even have a monopoly on the word slavery. Okay, we think we do. That every time the word slavery is mentioned, we are triggered. We do not have a monopoly on that word, though. Any more, by the way, than Jewish people have a monopoly on the word Holocaust. Because when you study the definitions of the two things, slavery doesn't mean a period in time when Black people alone were taken and being enslaved. Holocaust doesn't mean a period in time when Jewish people, specifically in Europe, Eastern and parts of Western Europe, were taken and were put in gas chambers, and 6 million of them passed away, and which eventually led to the formation of Israel from Palestine. Neither of those two statements can be true, because in many ways, slavery, when you talk about slavery that existed in the old days, the Christians were slaves. You had a white slave trade that was running parallel to the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? So even when we talk about the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide is a Holocaust. Even slave trade is a Holocaust when you study the definitions of what these words are. I would have put them up, but I don't want to spend too much time with slides. I tend to take too much time doing slides. So if we can call the genocide in Rwanda Holocaust, and we can call the slavery that existed with Christians in ancient Rome, and several other periods, the Zand Rebellion and so on, the period that in Iraq, the Eastern slave trade and so on, it doesn't have to be related specifically to Black people. Okay? Now, the next thing I want to just quickly talk about is the rise of a racial world, because this all goes hand in hand. as we start to look into these problems. Thank you very much, my people, for the ones. I appreciate that. Good to see you guys. A lot of new faces today. The next thing I want to just bring up quickly is the rise of a racial world, because once we begin talking about these two terminologies, slavery, Holocaust, and let's just focus on slavery for the time being, because this is the one that we get triggered the most by. You don't see Black people getting triggered by the word Holocaust, okay? Even though we have experienced numerous Holocausts, we still experience numerous Holocausts, certainly in the last 20, 25 years. You could even call to an extent. I'm not saying it is. What's going on in Sudan right now? What was going on in Central African Republic a few years ago? To an extent, the things that are occurring are a certain destruction of a whole population. But let's deal with slavery. Because the rise of a racial world is ultimately what goes into creating the transatlantic slave trade. Pre-transatlantic slave trade, the world generally didn't think in terms of race, generally speaking. And I have to emphasize this. Because later on, I'm going to bring up this point again about this African sold Africans thing. We have to put an end to it. But pre-transatlantic slave trade, the world generally didn't think in terms of race. We thought in terms of nationality. We had to. Again, if you've never been to Africa, if you've not come in contact with Africans from right across the continent, you don't even understand that phenotypically, the way we look as Africans is different. If you see a Somali person, you put a Somali person against a Ghanaian person. You put a Somali Ghanaian person against a Southern African person. You will see phenotypically, the eyes start to change. The body shapes, the facial features start to change, even the hair. Because the higher up you go in terms of climate, you can even see it manifest itself in the Olympics and athletics. The Kenyans, the Ethiopians, the East Africans tend to be the long distance runners, tinier people. But in West Africa, where most of African American people originate from, in Western Africa, they're more physical, able-bodied. They're able to do the short distance running. That's just a physical thing. But phenotypically, we are very, very different. And until you travel or come into contact with various Africans, you will not understand this. So the idea that Africans were thinking in anything but their nationality is very, very silly. Race was not even a concept for them. People, of course, recognized color in the sense that, not quite the way that we see color today, but in a sense where they were like, okay, we're all kind of brown. Oh, but when we see a white man, we know the difference. When we see an Indian, to an extent, we know the difference. People recognized color differences, but generally speaking, people had prejudices, discrimination against different groups. You see, discrimination and prejudices are essentially human nature, preferences. You might be a person who, okay, of course, the world is fabricated in such a way now where we think in terms of race, but even on a more micro level, we tend to go and tend to go and hang around with people who are like-minded. We are essentially discriminating against people who are not like-minded. That is at a very, 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 very basic level, a form of discrimination. But also, if, let's say, what's going on in my house, if I'm hearing my neighbor next door every single time making noise, I'm less inclined to want to go over. So what I tend to say is, oh, these people over there make noise. I've created a stereotype about my neighbor. This is how these things are created. So it's not to say that, oh, Africans were beefing Africans. It's very easy to say that looking in hindsight. It's very silly, though, because essentially people just have discriminations against different groups. We see it even in the diaspora. We see it in the diaspora. We see it in the Americas. Essentially people have this desire sometimes to separate themselves from the pack, whether you're Crips and Bloods, whether you're this and that. You find a way to pair up with like-minded people and go against the so-called enemy. So it happens. Of course, we are aware of, even when we talk about the word slavery, and I've dealt with this so much, and I really want to put an end to it because frankly, we until we really start to travel, we don't really understand this thing. But the indentured servitude was a thing. Certainly, Certainly, prior to, and we're still talking about pre-transatlantic slave trade. If you want to use that terminology, pre-transatlantic slave trade, indentured servitude was a thing. It's not until the Pope goes and gives, this is around the 1400s. So 1492 is Columbus's first voyage. It's not until that first voyage shows the promises of the New World that the Pope decides to say, I give you permission to reduce to servitude all infidels. In other words, anybody who is a non-Christian is put into perpetual slave trade. It's a perpetual slavery. In other words, it is not just them that will be slaves, but their children. You go and study history. Pick up a book, do a Wikipedia search of history before that time period. Never was it chattelized like that. It's not until the Pope goes and sanctions the capitalist states of Portugal and Spain to go and do their work in the Americas that we start to see this chattelization of human beings, which happen to be, unfortunately, African people. Non-specific African people. They didn't care. People from the African continent. But if you even look at the transatlantic slave trade, it happened in a particular region, mostly. If you look at that whole western part of Africa, all the way down, when you go to as far down as Mozambique, actually, Mozambique, Angola, all the way across the West African coastline. And then you have a different trade that goes on the eastern coast. I would even argue, and it's not a very popular statement, but I would even argue that the eastern slave trade that took Africans into the Far East, not good at all, by the way, but was not the same sort of transit. It was not the same as the transatlantic slave trade. Sure, no human being, by the way, wants to be under the control and lose their freedom. Nobody. But this idea that you are 3/5 of a human being, this idea that you not only, even, it is nothing you can do to get out of this state of enslavement. This comes with the chattelization of the transatlantic slave trade, when human beings were made to be chattel. So that is a peculiarity to African people. So this is where things start to shift, because this is why the pain is much worse for us than, say, the Slavic people that exist in the Balkan region, in Eastern Europe, who we get the word slave from. The English word slave comes from the word Slav. The Slavic people even as far as Ukraine. If you go to the Balkans now, places like Albania, Bulgaria, Romania, essentially these places are, for lack of a better word, excuse me, are essentially a form of third, and I hate using this word, but third world nations. They're very backward, but they're being propped up by the European Union. That's what keeps them going, right? So you have to even understand that it's not until we start to become chattel that this pain that we feel today, this is where it comes from. It's because we are the only people where we were turned to chattel. All the other slave trades. Now, yes, they were all degrading, but they were never there to make somebody a perpetual slave. And I've talked about this numerous times, it's not as if it's not as if they said, oh, Black people are specifically the people we're going to use, or people from Africa are people we're going to use. They went and tried it with everybody first. They wiped out whole populations in the Americas, wiped them out because they couldn't work the land. Even when you look at when they went to New Zealand and to Australia, they wiped out in Tasmania. There's a book called The Last of the Tasmanians. They worked these people to death and killed them for sport. But specifically about the slave trade, they tried it with everybody. They tried it even with their own Europeans. But when they see that Blacks are able to outlive the indigenous people and the white slavers, and when they saw the demand, the willingness to work with, the willingness that there was to negotiate with African kings on the coastline, or not just African kings, but African traders on the coastline, and that demand was created. By the way, that demand didn't just come up because Africans just decided, hey, let's just start selling people. There is a chronology which I've done on this page about how the first Africans were taken. It was really a form of kidnapped on the northwestern coast near Morocco, a place called Western Sudan now. That is where some Portuguese men went adrift and decided, hey, we've discovered a new land. Let's go and steal some people and go and show our king. This is how it started. But let me not go into too much detail. That's available on the channel. Check it out. Did a whole 2-hour piece on it. So the chattelization of African people was unprecedented. Okay? It is not, and again, I have to stress this, it is not in the human condition to be enslaved, whether you're chattel or indentured servitude. It is not in the human condition. Nobody wants to be taken against their will. Nobody wants to be made to work. It doesn't happen. And that's why we even see, like, on a more fictitious level, you see the Spartacus story. Slaves rebel, used as gladiators to fight and kill each other, but they rebel. But they were never, ever 3/5 of a human being. You see the Razanj rebellion that takes place in what would be modern-day Iraq, near Basra, took place 1,200 years ago now. Is it 1,200? Yeah, 1,200 years ago now. The Zanj rebellion shows that it doesn't matter how bad your situation is, or how minimal your situation is, people will ultimately rebel. And African people saw that every time we were put in that position to work the land, we were given extreme circumstances. Let me move on. So from that point of view, what we are seeing is the storyline about African people selling other Africans to the Europeans. And for many, many years, it was about the Europeans were the slave traders. Somewhere along the 1950s, 1960s, this whole concept of, well, a lot earlier than that, when education became more mainstream in the late 19th century, this whole African sold Africans starts to become a major, major theme. And I have to stress this because it's the only time in history that we've talked about slavery. And remember, I've talked about how many times slavery has occurred prior to the transatlantic slave trade. But never once have we ever heard a narrative of whites sold whites into slavery. Why is that? The only time we talk about, when we talk about slavery, is Africans sold Africans. Even though Africa, from a phenotypical standpoint, DNA standpoint to an extent, is the most diverse country in the world, continent in the world. It has every type of person, every type of human being, whether they call them Peking man, which is the man that goes to occupy modern day China, whether it is the people that occupy what would be India today, people in the Far East, people in Europe. Everybody gets their DNA from Africa. So African people, if you go and look at a San person from Southern Africa, if you look at them in the wrong light, they look Chinese. They can look Chinese, right? You go to even places in the Far East, places like Vietnam, places like Thailand, where you have darker populations that settled there thousands of years ago, and their populations have never died out. So the point I'm making anyway, this is the point I'm trying to make, is people have been enslaving each other for centuries, for thousands of years, but we never hear about whites selling whites. We always hear that Africans sold Africans. And this is where understanding the way the world is, the way geography and geology is, this is the reason why, there's a reason why we are focused on one and not the other. Or really, we should dead both of them, because ultimately, like I've said on numerous occasions, history is told from the point of view of the victor. So if the victor wins, he's not going to say, yes, I enslaved you. He's going to find a way to throw it back at you. And I'm going to deal with that in a second, in the next piece where I talk about dividing and conquering. Okay, so just checking people are still here. Okay, I'll read the chats at the very end. Bobby E. Wright, good to see you, my brother. Victoria, good to see you, my sister. All right. So the next point I want to bring up, and again, for those of you who just came in, the point of this live is to just deal with, or rather, let me do it this way. For those of you who just came in, I'm here to talk about, essentially, I'm using the words Black and African interchangeably. So the point I'm trying to, what I'm trying to do here is show that Black people and African people, we are one and the same. Our plight is the same, but it stems from a very complex background, but a background which, again, the narrative has been structured without us having any say in it, okay? So we're now at the point where I talk about divide and conquer, because what happens quite naturally when you a racial world, a world that starts becoming about race, a world that starts becoming about who has and who does not have, a world where the victor is realizing that Not only can I control the people that I have here, but I can go to a faraway land and control other people. This is where divide and conquer becomes very crucial. You see, again, like I said, human nature, when you're robbing from the poor, what you must do is divide and conquer. And the way you do it is you split people into different classes. You put one person in the upper class, you put another person in the middle class, you put another person in the lower class. If you look at the old feudal system, you had the monarch, you had the lords, the nobility, and then you had the the landlords, if you will, the landlords, and then you had the tenants. The tenants work the land for the landlord. Landlord is doing his best to be part of the middle class and try and be connected to the nobility. So what they do, what we've done even with slavery, because again, let's focus on slavery, because that's what we always want to focus on. They convinced the lower classes that there was something even lower. So when they were taking African people to the New World, they had been taking their European people. They had been using the people on the land, the natives. But as these people were dying out, and the few that did survive, they saw that these Africans were superior. And instead of, and remember, they brought them there in the first place. They brought the Europeans there in the first place, people like the Irish. They brought them there to work the land because they were the lower class. But now they convinced those Irish people that there's somebody even lower than you. You see, Africans are no different to anywhere else in the world in terms of how people interact. We are different culturally, but human beings act the same way. Even in Africa, you had feudal systems. We had feudal systems. You see it with the Hausa people. I did a documentary called Kano. Go and see how the feudal system worked. It wasn't the same as the ones in Europe. And keep in mind, the ones in Europe, we're talking about the period of the so-called Dark Ages or Middle Ages. We're talking about the period of the Crusades. You had the law of first night. And I've talked about this numerous times. You had the law of first night where the nobility had the right to sleep with your wife if you were lower class on the wedding day. My boy just got married recently. The idea that if we were living here 600 years ago on that same plot of land in England where he got married, his wife would have to go and sleep with the lord of the manor. This is an injustice. This is an injustice that's going on to the lower class in Europe. We're not even talking about Africans at this point. Yeah. So the transatlantic slave trade, even when you talk about the transatlantic slave trade and the people that were used to go and kidnap Africans, and I've talked about this also, is a system they called press ganging. Press ganging. They would essentially go and wander the streets because remember, these voyages are long. You cross these rough high seas. The Atlantic Ocean is not an easy place, especially when you don't know how to use the currents properly. They would go and press gang people, go and grab people from the streets, throw them on the boats and say, go to Africa and enslave people. As far as they're concerned, they're the lowest of the low. They're the lowest of the low that somebody can go and grab me. That is in itself a form of enslavement. But it's not until much later that it starts to be about color. And this is why this whole idea about seeing Africans sold Africans or Africans as one unifying people. This is why this was able to happen, because we would never, not just Africans, but the poor in general. And I'll come to even modern times how the poor in general don't even see that they should align to fight the elites. Now, let me not deviate from my main point. So essentially what happens is they're press ganging white people, throw them on boats, tell them to go and enslave black people. They even convince the long-term oppressed people of Europe that there was essentially something lower than they were. Right? They kept introducing classes below. So we have, again, upper class, we have the middle class, and then we have the lower class or / working class. They introduced other classes to create further superiority complexes and to create even more division. During slavery, we had an upper class, we had a middle class, we had a so-called, you could call it a white trash slash overseer class, you had a poor whites class, and then you had the black slave class. You see, this is the only time where black people, regardless of their status, wherever they came from, were all put on the same level. On the plantations, on those boats were royals, were farmers, were hunters, all together. Okay, so we are not talking about a situation where we as black people came from, we're all pastoral farmers and they just took all of us as part. They were taking everybody, every class. Now, during the colonial era, this is how they created more classes in the colonial era. In the colonial era, you had the white governors, you had the white army commanders, you had the white district officers, then you had the African clerks. These are the people that will manage the sort of liaison between the monarch, the fake monarch, and the governors. Then after the clerks, you have the African monarchs. So these are the people who have ruled these societies for hundreds of years, but eventually a puppet is put in, but an African clerk is above them, and then a district officer who is white is above them. And then at the very bottom, you have the African working class. And we see even today how those things have manifested into even worse problems that existed prior to the arrival of the European, prior to colonialism. We see it, look at, and I did a show a few weeks ago about the Tutsi-Hutu situation. The division, okay, again, there is a sort of feudal system already operating where you have a Tutsi class of rulers, not as oppressive as what the Belgians did with them, but they took it to another level. At the time, the Tutsi-Hutu thing, it was to do with who owned cows, because these are pastoral field, the cattle keepers. Who owned cows. The Belgians come and exacerbate the situation. They go and say that the Hutus and the Tutsis, okay, aside from the fact that we're going to have to divide you according to we're going to look at the way you look and really try and differentiate you. And not to say that there wasn't any difference in the way they looked, but they took it to another level and said, we're going to use you in the same way we use our feudal system in Africa, in Europe. And again, feudal systems are not all the same. Okay, a feudal system in Europe is very different to a feudal system in Africa, but we're not here for that. So why Africans sold Africans is so common. Why are we? So this African sold African statement, we're the only ones that tend to focus on it. It's only us that focus on it. If you think about it, we're the only ones that think about it. You never hear a white person say white people sold white people too. We never hear it. Okay. The next thing I wanted to bring up is the decline of African imperialism. Because I think when you understand African imperialism and its decline, it's largely to do with two things. My people, good to see everybody's here. Thank you very much, Bobby. Right, appreciate that. Okay, the decline of African imperialism. I've said this numerous times. I'm probably the only person that's used this phrase that I've seen anyway. Maybe people have, but I've never seen it. The brain drain that today we talk about the brain drain as the evaporation of African minds fleeing their borders to go and seek greener pastures in Europe, in America, wherever, Australia, to go and try and get a better life for them and their families. The brightest minds, the youngest minds, the most athletic minds. Or most people with the most athletic ability. But the first brain drain was the mass populations of African people that were taken from the shorelines of Africa, sent to the Americas, sent to the Caribbean, and were used to work at the land to build what we now call the Americas today, to build Brazil, to build Argentina, to build Guatemala, to build Peru, Chile, all these places, not just the United States. So there's been a brain drain over a 700 or 800 year period, not even including. So 1492. So what's that? 530 years ago. Obviously, there's a brain drain that occurred all around the world because European minds were also being taken and used and enslaved throughout the eras. But we're talking about modernity now. We're talking about our recent past. So the brain drain and of Africans, and the subsequent colonialism of the continent meant that there was nowhere in the Black world that you can go to today, that you can go to at the height of the 19th century, 20th century, where you will find people of African descent looking at each other with pride. You name a country over the last 200 years where we as African people can look on with pride. That does something psychologically to an enslaved mind, because there's nothing to look forward to. There is nothing to look forward to. And again, I brought this up numerous times. This is why when Haile Selassie was fighting his battle with Mussolini of Italy, even before that, when Battle of Adwa, when the Ethiopians were fighting their battles to try and remove the Italian oppressors, and Haile Selassie goes and appeals to the League of Nations, now called the UN, African Americans are seeing this thing and they say, my God, there is a king in Africa that we can get behind. And they're like, let's go and try and help him fight. But of course, the US State Department blocks this 100 years ago. This is why Haile Selassie, again, goes to Jamaica, and an enslaved people sees this king, this emperor. Haile Selassie, by the way, usurped the throne. He wasn't actually, but anyway, let's not spoil the man's legacy. But the reality is he got rid of his sister or half sister, whatever. Anyway, so I'll deal with that. But the point is, he goes to Jamaica and they see this figure, and they immortalize him in a religion called Rastafarianism, because an enslaved mind needs to see something that they can hold on to. And that is why where we are now as African people in general, the diaspora and at home, we have nowhere that we look to with that sort of pride. We have nowhere. And this is why, again, we start to now look at each other. Oh, Africans on the continent, Africans in the diaspora, blah, blah, blah. Africans in the South, Africans in the North, Africans in the Caribbean, Africans here. We start to create all these divisions. We create animosity between us, between the continent and the diaspora. The truth is, Africans didn't sell Africans to the Americas willingly. This we know from history. It wasn't willingly done. It's not as if they said, we got a bunch of spare Africans, take them. Absolutely not. The fact that we're still using stupid terminology like Africans sold Africans, all it does is it serves to create even more division amongst African people. And again, I use African and Black interchangeably. So the problem that we now face is, unfortunately, we are looking at each other, blaming each other, cursing out our homelands, cursing out our relatives in different parts of the continent, whether you're in the Caribbean in the Black world, whether you're in the Caribbean, Europe, or whatever, just creating all these divisions. But we as African people have nowhere in the world we can look at and say, we can take pride in that country. This empire represents for African people. Europeans can do it. And that's why they don't say stupid things like whites sold whites. Because they can point to 5 massive empires. Oriental people, the stuff that's going on in China, Oriental, I know is derogatory slightly, forgive me, but people in the Far East, the things that have gone on in China historically, under Mao 100 years ago, prior to that, Boxer Rebellion, etc. We're talking about people who have really seen their own Holocaust and their own slavery. But you will never hear these things, Chinese sold Chinese into slavery. There are 2 billion people in China, 1 billion in Africa right now. What they did within their own homeland and around the area to their own people, we never hear anybody saying anything. India has 1.5 billion people. What they do with the Dalits, so-called Dalits, Dravidian people, the darker skinned African people, who they've been written into their caste system of their religion as being the bad people of their religion. It's been written to the point where till today, you see the kind of experiences darker skinned people. You see what Gandhi was writing in the 1800s. What Gandhi was writing when he was in South Africa about the Kafirs. Give us guns, let's go and fight the Kafirs, the black people. This is during the Boer War. He wants to side with the whites to go and kill the blacks. He goes back to India and says the same thing about the Dalits. This is what is going on in India. But you don't hear anywhere that Indians enslave Indians. You don't hear anywhere that Indians sold Indians into slavery. You don't hear it. But Africa, we who have a powerful diaspora and have been miseducated so badly, we can just start shouting from opposite sides of the Atlantic, saying, you sold us, we didn't sell you, we're creating more division. If we stopped using these terminologies, we will see that Africans globally are suffering. Globally. Let's not make any bones about it. We are at the bottom of every society. My brother, Dr. Cameron, talks about this. It doesn't matter whether it's Islam. It doesn't matter whether it's Christianity. It doesn't matter whether it's communism. It doesn't matter whether it's capitalism. Africans are at the bottom of every single one. Make no mistake about it. And the so-called adopted nations that we have that we love, that we will go and fight for, they love us so little, if they even love us at all. So now I want to talk briefly about, and I know I'm going a little bit longer than I expected, but now I want to just talk briefly about how we go forward. Sons of Nock, good to see you, brother. Guys, please hit the like button. Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate that. Thank you. This is more of a rant. I really apologize. Okay, so decline of African empires I've dealt with. Breaking the cycle of ignorance. You guys have heard me numerous occasions talk about the fact that Africans on the continent, and I'm so sorry, Africans in the diaspora, we are ignorant. There are levels of ignorance, of course. There is a common sense ignorance, and there is a lack of education ignorance. But we're all ignorant. Make no mistake about it. You see, Africans in the diaspora, we need to study not just our history. We need to study the history of the world. Sorry, I don't know if is my mic still good? Yeah, it's still good. Okay. Still good, right? My mic? Yep. Okay. Yeah, it's still good. Yeah, still good. No problem. So, yeah. So Africans, not only in the diaspora, but Africans on the continent, we need to study the history of the world. But in particular the diaspora, we need to understand how the world, beyond Black people, how the world has operated in the past. Because if you even look at what they call modern day Pan-Africanism, modern day Pan-African comes out of the diaspora. This whole study of modern day Pan-Africanism, yes, there are intellectuals from Africa, but they took their lead, first of all, from the Europeans. Before we even start talking about the Sheikh Anta Diobs and Theophilo Bengas, they are coming firstly from the European educational system. In the Americas, there's a little bit more of a track record. So when George Padmore, H. Sylvester Williams out of the Caribbean are going and writing deep, very intellectual understanding, breakdowns of African history. You know, even before you get to the Joseph Benyokinans who are writing books, Black Men of the Nile. When George Jackson, George Jackson, my God. Oh my God. Sorry, my brain is gone. 1 a.m. I apologize. But we have all these intellectuals from the diaspora that are writing, that are making the connections, that are seeing some peculiarities in the information that the Europeans are given. And this is how we come to this modern day concept of Egyptology even. This is how we are coming to it because of African historians in the diaspora. What's happened, unfortunately, is that information was not shared because, again, we don't control education anywhere, whether in the Caribbean, whether in Africa, whether in the diaspora. We don't control the educational systems. And because we don't control the educational systems, we're allowing an oppressor, the victor. Started the show, I mentioned this. We are allowing the hunter to write the history of the lion. It is still happening today. Our ignorance of this subject of history is what is keeping us down. My brothers and sisters, it is what is keeping us down. Our ignorance is what is keeping us down. Our ignorance, our lack of, we are proud to boast that we don't know basic things that we should know. Why should we not know the names of every single country in Africa? Why should we not know the names of every single country in the Caribbean? Why should we not know the names of every state in the USA? Why should we not know the names of every country in Central Africa? Everywhere that pertains to African people. Why don't we know that? Now, it's not to say that European people are that much more intelligent, but certainly they have a more willingness to travel, a more willingness to find out about the world, because they themselves originate from so many different places. Yes, in the Americas, there is a gap. There is a blockage where people aren't able to connect to a particular place back in Africa. But definitely, that all that does is just, it gives you a bit more of an understanding of, I should find out a lot more. I should overcompensate. And this is what people from the 1900s up until the 1980s, African people, this whole striving to this knowledge of self-concept is about trying to find out as much as possible. Because guess what? Us growing up in Africa, Victoria, you're in the chat. Victoria grew up in Kenya. I grew up in Nigeria. We were not learning these things. We were not learning anything like this. So we come to the diaspora. My understanding of the subject in general comes because I'm in the diaspora. I have access to the diaspora information. So we are working together. We are absolutely working together. But now we've gotten to a place where we've slipped and we've allowed a generation to pass by completely. And now they have been completely educated by the hunter. So there are no more lions to educate. But I actually say there are. Now, looking to home is the true empowerment. Yes, there is no place in Africa that we can look to with pride. Again, I brought this up. There's the Rwanda and all these places which are coming up. There's no place that we can look to with pride and say, okay, you are a world power. But we are certainly moving to a more collective way of thinking. If you look at what's happening at the Arab states in the Middle East, so-called Middle East, they may not agree with each other, but they are coming together. They're starting to control whole aspects of the world. The Qataris, small, tiny country, they own a lot of the infrastructure. Britain has the fifth biggest economy in the world. They own a chunk of that. They're buying up football teams. They're investing in major cities, development of their societies. They're inviting people from Europe, from America, excuse me, the most highly educated, giving them big salaries to come there and develop their nations. Very intelligent. Because when they're done, they will send you back and they will be the power. That's how it works. Power is moving east. Power is moving east. The global West is not the same powerhouse it was 50 years ago. Again, I say this: if you told the head of the British monarch in 1935, when my father was born, that there will be because they had this concept of the sun will never set on the British Empire. If you told them that within the next 30 years you would have lost half of your empire, they wouldn't have believed it. And now they've got an Asian prime minister. So the point I'm making is power is shifting east, whether we like it or not. Power is moving towards Arabia. And when it's Arabia's turn, when Arabia's turn is over, it will go back to Africa. Where will you be? Where will you have set your foundation and your roots? So again, looking to home is the true empowerment. Abandoning all this terminology like Africans sold Africans will help us see that Africans were no different to the rest of the world who enslaved members of their own societies. Because everybody did it. Yes, the chattelization is different, but the Africans on the continent didn't impose that chattelization. The Europeans did. The buyers did. The landlord did. The hunter did. We focus so much on the wrong things. I mean, the question should be, if Europe never got involved in Africa, would most of the diaspora be home? Those of you in the chat, let's just see how much of history you even know, because this should be basic. If Europe never got involved, where would you be right now? Would your name be James or John or whatever? No. You would be back home because Africans were not looking to send people to the Americas. They'd never been there. They never saw it. Yes, and again, for those of you who come at me in the comments and start saying, yeah, the Africans went to the Americas. Yes, but not in mass numbers. People they weren't travel agents advertising, or go to ask Mayan ruins and go and see the Mayan ruins. No, of course not. So we focus on the wrong question, because if Europeans were not involved in Africa, we wouldn't have this problem. Instead, what we tend to do is we focus on people who, by, I guess, today's standards, are in a worse condition than its diaspora. African people on the continent are in a worse situation than you. Believe it or not, the education, if they even get it, is significantly subpar to what you get. As bad as it is for you, just think about how bad it is for people in Africa. Losing its citizens by the day for hundreds of years. Just think about it. And the height of this was 1700 to 1850 was the height. The biggest numbers were taken in this period. But now, even today, this brain drain, everybody in Nigeria, we have this saying called Onto Jakpa, which is Yoruba language. So I want to leave. They are just trying to leave. I was in an Uber once in Nigeria. My taxi driver had a Canadian flag. I'm like, "Are you Canadian?" He's like, "No, but I'm praying to go to Canada and leave." So we have these numerous brain drains that are taking place across Africa. But the biggest brain drain took place back in the Renaissance period, late Middle Ages, in the 17, 18, 19, and 1900s. So losing its citizens by the day for the same people who bought their ancestors. So your ancestors are taken from a continent, put somewhere else. And instead of looking at the person who brought them over, we focus on the cousins that you left back home. This is a problem. And we have to stop it if we have any chance of surviving when it's our turn, because it's coming. Now, the last 3 points, and then start taking your questions. My people, I appreciate you for being here. Please hit the like button, my people. Please hit the like button. Next, naturally, is unity. And I have an image there of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah with the late great Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah with the late greatest Muhammad Ali. And I use that image because unity is the only thing that's gonna get us to where we need to be. You see, let's go back to something that we all know. Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King gained success, he gained fame for really minor advances for Black people, for African people in the Americas. You can go to restaurants, you can use toilets, go to schools. Actually, no, I think the desegregation of schools had happened before, but he still had a crucial part. He played a crucial part there. To live in white communities, which is what everybody deserved, right? But really, it's not until he wanted to show the collective lower class, Black and white, and everything in between, the collective lower classes of society, that they were really fighting a wasted battle. It's not until he goes and shows that he's taken out. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, you can go to all the restaurants, you can go to all the schools, but what if you can't afford it? There's no point in talking about it unless you can afford it. He was going to camp he was going to take Americans, poor people, to the capital, to the capital of the city of the United States. He's going to take everybody to Washington, D.C., and tell them that we are going to camp here until we can find a way to get jobs and justice. Because it's pointless having these freedoms if you cannot pay for them. And I would argue that what African people are experiencing now at the lower class level, the working class level in America, is you cannot even afford to live there. You have to work so hard, pay your taxes, and still do the right thing before you can even survive. So the question is, why was he taken out when he was going to get the collective? It's quite simply because this is not just a black issue. This is a class issue. Of course, black people, African people, we have a peculiar set of circumstances because we're right at the bottom at everything, racially. Okay? But there's a way to look at it. Same thing with Fred Hampton. Look at Fred Hampton. Even the ANC in South Africa. Fred Hampton was going to unite not just black, but whites. South Africa, the ANC. Now, the ANC is largely an African organization, but there's certainly, even though I talked about Gandhi and how some Indians in South Africa were wanting to side with the Boers to fight, side with the Afrikaners to fight against the Kafirs during the Zulu War of the late 19th century. They were still Indians and went and joined the ANC. Not many, but there were certainly those who realized that we're better as a collective. You know, Gandhi had been very vocal during the Boer War, as you know, but the ANC brought a kind of like a harmony between some Indians and the blacks. So that's a positive. You know, black people in general, black African people, we need to come together, not with any kind of air of superiority. We need to stop this superiority complex or air of judgment, you know? But we need to recognize our collectivity. I said this before. We need to come together and realize we are collectively going through the same thing. Later, for the, oh, you said this. At the end of the day, somebody comes to your house. You could be arguing with your spouse. Your children could be fighting. Somebody comes to your house to try and attack you. You all defend. Put the arguments to the side. And we don't realize that there's a burglar at our doorstep. One through the door, one coming through the window. We don't realize it. We don't realize it. It was easier when we could see that the enemy was coming. Now we don't even realize. We're half asleep. One person put his headphones on because he doesn't want to hear anybody else. Another one locked his door. So they don't even know if their brothers and sisters are in trouble. We're just like, oh, whatever. We don't recognize this. In Europe, Africans and the Caribbeans in the last 10 years are starting to come together a little bit more. The time my father was here in the 60s, even me growing up, my wife and people like that who grew up here in the 80s and the 90s, you know what it was like to be an African kid. Similar to what it was like in the United States and maybe other places. Being an African, there's beef. There's beef. You know, but you know, even as people get more and more comfortable, we create more divisions. I remember 20 years ago being in an area of London that's largely Somali. There's an area of, I won't say where it is because I don't want to bring any beef, but largely Somali area right next to a largely Nigerian area, they used to have beef, gang beef. I didn't necessarily think it was racial, but certainly when the racial components of Somalis in that region versus the other region, which is significantly Nigerian, we will always find a way to divide. This is the problem. But for the most part, I only brought that up just so you know, a little anecdotal story about how we always divide. But ultimately, Africans and Caribbeans, which was the greater problem, are starting to come together. Caribbeans are starting to embrace African culture and Africans have always embraced a lot more Caribbean culture in this country anyway. If you look in France, people from the Antilles, the Caribbean islands, the Africans, they come together. They recognize, because I guess it's similar to different parts of the world, they recognize that what France does to its people, black and white, right? Arab, but beyond that, they recognize what it does to the European working class. Don't forget, King Louis was murdered. Bastille Day was about people storming the Bastille because they were tired of the way this king was imprisoning and dealing with people, and they chopped his head off. The working class did that. And by default, the Haitian Revolution was more of a success. Had Louis stayed in power, Haitian Revolution may not be as successful. Maybe it might have been successful in certain parts, but the collective success had to do with the fact that he was killed, and then Napoleon came in, and so on. I'm waffling. I'm sorry. Caribbeans even moving to Africa. In 2016, the Republic of Ghana granted a handful of Caribbean and American emigres citizenship, Ghanaian citizenship. In a very President John Mahama, excuse me, then president of Ghana before Nana Akufo-Addo, he goes and gives these people nationality, symbolic. You know, you have even the likes of Dynasty Mayor. He goes and does this, takes a lot of people back. You know, I don't really care. You know, you don't have to be friends with people to recognize that it's important work. We don't need to all be friends. We just need to do the work. We need to connect back to the continent. When you look at even just from a spiritual point of view, Santeria, that's practiced in Cuba, the spiritual system. Candomblé, that's practiced in Brazil, spiritual system. Vodou, that's practiced in Haiti. Africans in the Americas still practice their culture, the culture of their ancestors who came from Africa, because they never bought into that whole African sold Africans. People in the Caribbean don't talk about this, or African sold Africans. It's when they come in contact with the West, you start to hear these conversations. People in Brazil are not talking about African sold Africans because they still have the DNA of Africans in them. They still have a continuity of African culture. In Trinidad, the whole concept of the Maroons that exist in the Caribbean is because people maintain their culture. So they didn't buy into this BS of African sold Africans. But when you all your culture is done away with you, that's when you start to buy into this statement. I'm going to round up very quickly, please, because I think I'm going a little bit longer than I expected. My last two slides are really about two things. And one is pretty obvious. For those of you who know me, you know the kind of things I like to talk about. Let's stop seeking the validation of the West. Let's stop it. Okay, no. Only. Let me be more specific. Let's stop seeking the validation of the West only, because to an extent, the world, we live in a globalized world. You need to be able to do business with the West. They have the infrastructure, so fine. But we cannot focus on it solely. And I put the picture there of the Oscars, not because I'm not saying African people shouldn't aspire to win Oscars. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it cannot be where we put all our focus. The NBA, Black music in general, both in Africa and on the continent, both in Africa and in the diaspora, are probably the single biggest entertainment industries in the world. Music industries in Africa and in America. You take those two industries, you can run global music for the next 100 years. Certainly the royalties that will come out of it. Those artists could go and buy back the royalties of artists like Duke Ellington and Fela Kuti and so on, people that existed in previous eras of music, and own Black music, Michael Jackson's catalog, etc. The songs that Elvis had ripped off, make him pay royalties for those songs. You understand? We have so much power, but we focus on the validation of the West. African Americans have been stripped of their identity. We know it. Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in South America and Central America. But I'm sorry, that is not an excuse in 2023 to ignore the way the rest of the Black world sees things. It's not because your point of view is this that you have to accept that everybody has to accept it. It's not something that people like to hear, but it's the truth. Because if we continue to focus on ourselves, we never look at the collective. I said it on last live I did. I was like, there are 40 to 50 million Africans in America. There are at least 800 million on the continent. It's lopsided. We have to think the same. We look up to you, but you also need to look to us, because we have the base, the population base and the land base. Just as I said, Pan-Africanism was essentially created by Africans in the diaspora. Not created, but spearheaded. Modern day Pan-Africanism was spearheaded by Africans in the diaspora. They are still Africans, but they were looking backwards. They were saying, what did we do in Africa? All this movement, this Kemet movement, this whole information about Kemet starts with Africans in the diaspora. But I'm talking. I'm spending too long on this, and I want to just make my point quickly. Your point of view is the loudest. I'm speaking specifically to Africans in the diaspora. I'm speaking to Africans in the UK, Africans in France, Africans in the United States, Africans in Brazil, anywhere where Africans have a loud voice in any field, whether it's sport, entertainment, or business. Your voice is the loudest when you speak. There's the rapper Booba, biggest French rapper in the world. Yeah, is he the biggest? Yeah, biggest of the last 25 years. Booba lives in Miami. He's a mixed race guy, half Senegalese, half French or Belgian, whatever. Grew up in France. Rose to become the biggest artist in France. Lives in Miami. Just went and did a concert in Ivory Coast. He's in Ivory Coast right now doing a show. People are wearing the Senegalese jersey because they identify that 50% of his DNA that's Senegalese. They're like, he's one of us. You go and see when a prominent African-American artist or entertainer goes and does their DNA, and they find out where they're from, Africans will claim them. They're saying Deontay Wilder is Nigerian. We knew he was Nigerian before he did his DNA because you can see how he behaves. You know what Yoruba man when you see it. You know? We claim because we want you home. We want you home. Your voice is loud. If you speak, the world will listen. But we are not thinking, we're still thinking about some sort of past that we have not only have we not reconciled, we don't even know, we've not even studied. You've not understood the past. And that's why, again, we will come to travel in a minute, but it's no use being recognized in the States, in the Caribbean, in Europe as the first Black person to do something. These are some of the problems that we have. We want to be the first Black person in the Western world to do something. Because you come from a continent, a people who were the first to do many things. So this focus on, let me be the first Black person to first and get these awards, you know? But many of us would rather scream, oh, that I don't want another slavery movie. I don't want to watch a slavery movie. When the thing is still haunting us. It's still haunting us. That's why we don't want to watch anymore. Not just slavery, but the power, the lack of power we have to even create the stories we want. The lack of collectivity that we have to be able to say, we don't want this. Let's go put it together. I haven't seen a movie about the Holocaust for a long time. And I know Jewish is an easy comparison, but even when you look at the rise of Bollywood, the Indian cinema, they started out with Slumdog Millionaire, which wasn't an Indian production. It's a focus features, essentially an American-British production set in India. They thought, okay, you know what? Let's go break into this Indian market. It's not until this year when they made that movie, it was RRR, that penetrated the Oscars. Indian people never needed the West. They never needed them. They focused on India and built their industry. Nigerians are starting to do it too. But we in the diaspora don't even want to look home. We're complaining about the West America's making these same movies. But your people are there. You have the personality. If Michael B. Jordan says, I'm going to star in a movie, I want it to be in Ghana. You walk into Columbia or whoever, MGM or whoever it is, MGM's Amazon. You walk into them and say, I want to go shoot a film in Africa. I want to use African film crew. Okay, maybe you can't greenlight it like that. Will Smith could maybe 2 years ago, but they don't. The mentality is not there. It's a Western mentality still. We're still seeking the validation of the West. And that's fine, but it can't be the only thing you focus on. Now, my last slide. 1 hour 19. Okay. That's not as long as I thought. Good to see my people. Knowledge beyond your borders. Those of you who know me, those of you who are regulars, Lizzie, good to see you, sister. Bobby Wright, son of Nok, Mr. Siad. Those of you who know me, you know what I'm about. You know what I'm about to say when I say knowledge beyond your borders. There's a sister on Gorée Island in Senegal. And in a minute, I'm going to give you some information, but let me make my point quickly and then we'll come to the chats. Traveling, my brothers and sisters, is the cure to the mental retardation, the mental state that America, that Britain, that France has forced upon us. Traveling. Look, come to Europe if you wish first. You don't have to go directly to Africa. Go to Europe and see how Black people are different. How they come to be in Europe. Understand that not everybody, like, it's easy to be across on the internet and see, oh, there are Black people in Britain, there are Black people in France, da 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 da. But how we arrived in all these different places is different. And how we see our current state is different. Yes, we're all facing the enemy in a sense. We're in the enemy's home. And we're all fighting those same sort of racial problems. But we're also still programmed by them. But even when you come to Europe, because there are people, we're all facing a sense of, we're all trying to cope with this sort of white dominance, if you will, this European dominance. But at least you will see how we, in different parts of Europe, embrace diversity, for example. London, Paris, Brussels, Birmingham, Liverpool, these major cities across Europe. Go and see them, and then after go to Africa. You will not be away from the plight of white dominance if you come to Europe, but you won't be away from the plight of white dominance if you go to Africa either. Because this is a global problem that faces African people. So the question is, if I can start traveling and seeing just how my people are living all around the world, it can at least help me to understand why. Because yes, you came over the Atlantic to America directly, but really we came via Europe. I'm not saying physically, mentally. Because Europe is essentially what controlled what the Americas were. Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, France, and Britain. This is what controlled the Americas. We were programmed. So even America in itself, America is a baby. 250 years old? America? United States of America, 250 years old. Canada, similar. It's a baby countries. Britain, 2,000 years old, nearly. Because the Romans invaded in the 44, I think 5th century, 1st century AD, they invaded Britain. And it became, you have the Norman French invasion that took place. So over a while, over 1,000, 2,000 year period, Britain's old. France, in a way, is old. These people, we came directly to the Americas, but we came via Britain. We came via Europe. So let's go to Europe and see how our Africans there are dealing with them. Okay. Now in Africa, and this is because I've been reading a lot of comments. People just it's the same issue. People say, "Oh, people don't treat us good if we go to Africa. They have problems with us and so on." Let me just say this about travel in general. In Africa, you'll still be an outsider. If you're from the Americas, you'll still be an outsider because you're not indigenous to that place. I, to an extent, can go to a different part of Africa and feel like an outsider. Of course I can. I was in Egypt the other day. I felt like an outsider. I went to Nubia, Black Land. I felt like an outsider. I can go to Rwanda, where my mother's from, and feel like an outsider because I didn't grow up there. They will call me names. They might not call me to my face, but they'll call me names because I'm different. They'll speak in their language in a way that I don't understand. That just happens when you travel. You see, you'll still be an outsider. But let me ask you, where in the world, as an African person, a Black person, can you go where you blend into the population? Because it's not until you open your mouth that people know you're an outsider. It's not until you say your name that people know you're an outsider. Where in the world can you go where you blend in? not America, not Britain, not France. There might be some areas, but ultimately, no. One can still be an American and not be of America. You could still be from a place in a sense that 3-4 generations back, this is the only home you know. Fine. But you could still not be of America. You could still not be of Britain. I know people who are first generation, their parents came here from somewhere in Africa. They've never been back home. I remember talking to one girl one time. I said, I mean, when you die, where do you want to be? Well, I've never even thought about it. I'm expect to die here. It's an African person lost to the world, lost to Europe. You know, you see, but the in Europe, very few people, white or black, call themselves, like say for example in Britain, very few people, white or black, call themselves British only. We're hyphenated nationalities. Many people are like, "Oh, where are you from?" They'll say the nationality, where their parents come from. That's what tends to be happening now. Happens in France too. Happens in Belgium. What origin are you? We recognize that now. Granted, in the Americas, it's not so clear, but obviously these people visit their homelands. They have 2 different passports. They have that access. Not all of them choose to, but just because there's no direct home for you in Africa, just because there's no direct country that you can link yourself back to, doesn't mean that you can't make one. Again, people chose to move to Ghana, and in 2016, they were granted Ghanaian citizenship. In the next generation, that generation will consider themselves Ghanaian. Again, I talk about Dr. Cambon, my friend Dr. Cambon. Dr. Cambon moved there in 2018, had all his children there. They're raised as Ghanaians. You see, because you have to look at it like this. It took one generation to wipe your Africanness out. Your ancestors arrived in America from wherever they came from. None of these countries existed. There was no Nigeria, no France, no Togo, no Benin, nothing. None of these countries existed at that time. They were different, nationalities in terms of the ethnic group and the empires. But when they arrived, in one generation, they were gone. By the time they had their children just saw America. They knew they were from Africa, just like every black person in the Americas knows they're from Africa. They don't know where. But even with the DNA thing, if you're not a fan of the DNA thing, it doesn't really matter. You could still make a new nation. You could still have a hyphenated nationality. You could still be American and this. It's not about saying this is my home. It's about saying I have an alternative home to go to. In one generation, your nationality is wiped out. But in the case of people like Dr. Cambon, in one generation, the family is the African connection is regenerated. We live in a globalized world, my people, where in just a single generation, you can transfer nationalities. You can be living here today, go and take a job in Europe, spend 5 years there, 6 years there, and gain nationality. I can get up from here, go work in Canada, 5, 6, 7 years, gain nationality. Where am I really from? I'm African. I'm Nigerian. I'm Rwandese. That's my nationality. My passport is merely so I could travel. You see, you could be American and not be of America. But the problem is we're all focusing on that. And yes, if you want to focus on all this ADOS, FBA reparations, fair enough. That's you. Do you? I'm not. This is not for everybody. By the way, Africa is not for everybody. I think there will be some people who will be of benefit to Africa, and there will be people who will not be of benefit to Africa. And in a minute, I'm going to play 2 videos for you before we wrap up, by the way. People can easily move to Africa and assimilate in the society. It's probably easier for you to do than anywhere else in the world. Even English-speaking countries in Europe, like Britain and Scotland, England and Scotland, you can move to Africa and assimilate into the culture quite quickly. You get the mannerisms. You may not know the language, but if you're humble enough, you can learn. Over time, you can learn. And you can still stay connected to America. You can still stay connected to Brazil. You can still stay connected to Trinidad. It doesn't. Roots are roots, culturally as well as DNA. People have dual heritage a lot more than ever now. So your location, my people, should never restrict you. Never. Right. That said, my people, I'm going to read a couple chats in a minute, but I want to just play a couple of videos for you. Let me just give you a little background. These two videos that I'm going to play are from, if you see the documentary When We Were Kings, the documentary they made about the famous Rumble in the Jungle. Look at the names: Rumble in the Jungle. Who's dictated? Who decided to make that name? Miseducation. There's more jungle in South America, in America per square kilometer than there is in Africa. But they were just, Africa's a jungle. You see the education. But let me not rant too much. But the Rumble in the Jungle documentary, and it was two statements made by Muhammad Ali. One was quoted by a journalist, and the other he makes himself. And I want you to just try and understand. Again, this is not to try and separate. I'm not here for separation. Majority, I think 90% of my audience is in America. So I'm not here to divide. I'm merely trying to let you know that we need to move on. We need to go home. We need to figure this thing out for our own, if not for us, for our children. If not for our children, for our grandchildren. So I'll play the first video. This was recorded off the, I was recording it on a thing, so I hope YouTube doesn't like catch me, but let me just play it for you guys. So we all heard that, and I won't say anything else about that. I'm just going to go straight to the chats now. We've been on for an hour and 34 minutes. My people, please hit the like button. Please hit the like button. These like I said, for those of you who weren't here at the very beginning, the lives, I think I'm going to be doing less and less of them now. I'm just going to do pre-recorded stuff. I think it's just easier to do. I love the interaction, by the way, but I think just for the time being, focus on a little bit more of the pre-recorded and upload. I'm doing a lot more stuff on abibitumi.tv, which is run by Dr. Cambon. So I'm going to be doing some stuff with him there. I'll upload it on this channel too. But let me go straight to your comments. First one, start with the super chat. Plato, respect. Thank you for the super chat. Okay. Bobby E. Wright. Habari Gani, my brother. Habari Gani. Glad to catch the live. Thank you. Good to have you. I know you come in quite late sometimes, so it's good to see you. Elvit, very true. Race is made up. Absolutely. Bobby E. Wright. So between 250,000 and 500,000 Africans were taken from Mozambique by the Portuguese. That's just one place. Again, we never really should look at the numbers that they recorded as arriving. If you watch my documentary, Daome Avodu, I talk about how many were sacrificed in rivers, in the Thames River and the Atlantic Ocean, just to avoid paying taxes, avoid paying extra fares, and because of they were ill. Just think about how many were lost. The late Marcus Garvey Jr. did a lecture in the early 90s, and published a paper about just a calculation. Nigerian Historical Society also did some calculations as to how many Africans were taken in the Eastern slave trade and Western and transatlantic slave trade. So really, we're talking about easily close to 50 or 100 million people collectively on the continent over a 1,000-year period, from when the Nubians first did the deal with the Arabs during the Umayyad Caliphate, which we talked about in a previous live. From then, 1,000 years later, at least 50 to 100 million. How many landed is a different case. I've run across that book about Chuganini. Yeah, The Last of the Tasmanian. Very good book. Very, very good book. I hear they're trying to make it into a movie. Gizuri D. McInnes, teach us. Thank you. Appreciate that. Bobby Wright, thank you. Kano documentary was good. Thank you, brother. Thank you very much. Mel Gibson's Braveheart had first night. Yes, as part of the storyline. Yeah, of course. Remember, because England was essentially, and people don't like it. A lot of English people don't like it when I say this. England is essentially practicing their own form of colonialism in Britain. The Welsh and the Scots are under the control of London. London controls, they have a devolved government. In other words, Wales has their own they manage their day-to-day affairs. Scotland manages their day-to-day affairs. That's essentially what we call, in Africa, we called it what's the word I'm looking for now? God, this is so late for me. Indirect rule. That's indirect rule. London would dictate to all its colonies, but they'll have a district officer there. Now, obviously, a devolved government, it's a Scottish person that's running Scotland, Wales person reporting running Wales, but their parliament has to come to London. So this is, so of course the story of Braveheart, where England was controlling Scotland, that was absolutely part of the storyline. This is absolutely a thing that happened. In fact, it's one of the reasons people went to the Crusades. Thank you, Victoria. Appreciate you, sister. Please, guys, hit the like button. Son of Knock, how come you didn't get the notification for this live? My brother, please hit the notification bell, my brother. You should definitely get it. John G. Jackson, thank you very much. Anthony Furman, the Haitian Pan-Africanist who wrote Equality of the Races, was an architect of the first Pan-African conference. Absolutely. When was this? Early 1900, I think it was. 1901. Diaspora on YouTube taught me more in 5 years than I learned in schools. Mr. Siad, powerful statement. George Padmore, thank you, Bobby. Right? Yes, I think I remembered it in the end. Tapu Publishing, Africans were the first in the American continent. Okay. Maudlin, where's the damn? As many native Africans that are over here would be the same amount of blacks that came to the West. It would be inverse. There's no more than 4 million African immigrants here. What are you talking about? As many native Africans that are over here would be blacks that came to the West. As in the amount of African immigrants that are here now are the same as the Africans that were brought here. Is that what you mean? Let me know. Says domain, Africans sold Africans is not a statement that should cause a divide. It's to bring an understanding of what truly happened. No. This is the point I'm trying to make, that we ourselves have issues, but we want to blame everyone else. I hear what you're saying. My issue is the continuous use of the word, of the statement rather, because simply saying Africans sold Africans is not only showing ignorance of the history at the time and how things happened, and all it does is creates more division. It actually creates more division than you think, because you have to understand the collective lack of historical information that we both have, the lack of desire to find out more about our history, but also because when you study the history, Europeans enslaved Europeans, but we never ever heard when Europeans were being bought all across Europe. We never ever heard the statement white sold whites or Europeans sold Europeans. So that is why it's a dangerous statement, because it's only us that use it. We don't have even a power base that we can hold and say that this is a powerful African nation. So this is partly why it's easy to look at each other, because we can't see any way out of the problem, so we just blame each other. It's the crabs in a barrel mentality. Thank you for the comment. Lizzie, honestly, at this point, I believe the agitation exists online by certain characters for views and likes. In this day and age, to remain ignorant about yourself is a choice. Lizzie, good point. Lizzie, by the way, I'm still waiting for you to get on this live, by the way. Still waiting. If Africans do not look at and admit our own faults, we will forever have a victim mentality. It's almost like we don't have a mind of our own, and we're like we're not our own persons. True. Never a truer statement made. Every other race has one thing that we Africans and blacks do not have. Other races put community above individual, but Africans put the individual above community because we lack unity. Well said. Well said. Modine, sorry, where's the diamond? Akon said, Modine, I think I've seen you before. You've been on here before. Akon said he wants to bring all blacks to Africans. He said Africa would be a superpower, and the world has made so many songs about Africans uniting, even not Africans. Absolutely. We as African people have to recognize that we have a common fight. Amadou Diallo, the Senegalese brother, is he Senegalese or Guinean? He's from Guinea, wasn't he? Shot 41 times. The guy shot in New York, right? Wasn't asked, was he continental or African American? Thank you, my brother. Thank you. Well said. I really don't waste time with people who choose to highlight quarrels and of the sorts. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, brother. Mr. Ziad, absolutely correct. It never comes up in the Caribbean. Yeah, so this is what we're talking about. The whole idea of African soul. No one talks about it, except it's really in the Americas. And I would actually say, granted, I don't. I think there's certainly a sect of people online who are creating this, but again, the power of social media. It may seem like it's online, but you'll be surprised what young children are picking up on a daily basis that they shouldn't be picking up because people are online. I found out about this mutual hate happens whenever Africans black come in proximity with the West or other racial groups. Well said, good point. We have to spot those terms and talking points and strike from the conversation for the starters. Absolutely. Son of Knock, we focus on pettiness. Yes. It would be awesome to see you collab with O'Shea Duke Jackson. Okay, cool, no problem. Where are we? Okay, my bad. So, I have never been impressed by being the black in a professional conference sticking out like a sore thumb. Why would why would you want to be? Like that's the whole point. Like we are way more comfortable around our people. The first black has consistently been used by Hollywood, the West, the left to subjugate not just blacks, but all other non-white races. It's an insult. It's an insult to say someone was the first black. Thank you. Thank you. Inspired by LJ. Appreciate that, brother. Thank you. Yo, bro, I'm still waiting for that invite. Which invite? Am I missing something? Let me know what invite we're talking about. Have I missed something? I fundamentally disagree with you, bro. Africans can't blend in always in Africa. North Africans discriminate against, okay. South Africans discriminate against West Africans. Okay, so here you go. What you've done already, Sia talks. There's nowhere. First of all, Africa is not just North Africa and it's not just South Africa. There's a whole jumble of people in the middle, and those jumble of people. If you jumble of people, what kind of English is that? Once you arrive at the airport and you step out into the streets of Kinshasa, step out into the streets of Kigali, Kampala, Lagos, Accra, no one knows who you are. You blend in. The discrimination, by the way, we've talked about this already. There's discrimination everywhere. What's going on when gangs discriminate against gangs that live 2 streets away? I mean, I live in London. The gangs of black kids who live 1 street away from each other. What do you call that? Discrimination will always happen. You cannot keep letting these things. You cannot keep letting these things rule our decision making. It just creates more problems. It took 1 generation to wipe your African nationality out. In 1 generation, you can regain your African nationality. Powerful. Absolutely, my brother. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm going to wrap up if there are no more comments. Some black Americans are of this notion that they are native to North America before the transatlantic slave trade. Look, I don't really, I'm not really mad at that. But at times I think it's done because there's this whole trying. It's part of the same African things. It's trying to distance yourself from the inevitable home that we all call. That we all find ourselves from. When Christopher Columbus, I talk about this a lot, I'll bring it up again, but when Cristobal Colon is his real name, Christopher Columbus, when he arrives in the Americas and he sees African people trading on the coastline, those African people have come directly from the west coast of Africa. They probably went back too because they understand the movement of the currents. Cristobal Colon says in his book, he says, as man and boy, I sailed up and down the Guinea coast. In other words, he sailed down the coast from Portugal into West Africa and sailed from that same current into the Gulf of Mexico. So he absolutely knew. He absolutely knew what he was doing. So he's been to this place before, and he's very, very knowledgeable of what's there, and he knows how to sail back, just like these Africans. Again, 100 years before that, when Abu Bakr was able to sail over, Abu Bakr's people were found. Abu Bakr's people settled in that part of the world. It's not like they were shipwrecked; they settled in that part of the world. So absolutely, there were Africans there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every African in America or that is found in America is indigenous to the people who would settle. Because again, which period are we talking? All right. Yeah. Is it yeah? I watched your movie recommendation, Burn, and it was amazing. Thank you. Yes. This is the film I mentioned to you, Burn, Kimada with Marlon Brando. Good film. I'm going to do a series of... I might do it as a live, actually. Some films. I want to do some film stuff. I think cinema is very important. I think understanding African cinema and seeing how when you talk about these political films that existed throughout Hollywood, or even made outside of the Hollywood system, there's a lot that was made in Africa too by pioneers of cinema. And those films, I think, when you start again, travel broadens your horizons. Um, a few weeks ago, I did a live where we're talking about different places you should go, different times you should go to Africa. And one of the places I recommended was FESPACO, the Pan African Film Festival that takes place every 2 years in Burkina Faso. Going to events like that, not only are you exposing yourself to a world of African cinema, but you're connecting with different African people from around the world. And these opportunities are invaluable because in a short 10-day space of time, you get to not only interact, but learn a bit more about a place that you've never been. And those are the friends that you make. And you start to travel a bit more, but you have to always be willing to you have to go there with an open mind. So thank you for that, brother. I appreciate it. I'm going to wrap up, but let me just say this to you. For those of you who was there for the 10K live that I did last week, those of you who were there for Bobby, right? I see you. It's foolishness. Yes, I get it, brother. I appreciate that. But those of you who are there for the 10K live video that I did last week, Sunday. So we've been making some inroads, and we're in the process of organizing a trip to Senegal. So I'm organizing it with a contact I have back in Senegal, and I will either on the next. I might have to again. I'll have to probably get on a live for that one too. But those of you who have expressed interest, we're going to be organizing a trip to Senegal at some point in the year. In the next day or two, I'm going to make initial itinerary, and once the details are ironed out, I will let you know. But I am going to start doing a sort of tour because it's not really my thing, but it seems like there's a lot of interest there. But that said, my people, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming in. Please hit the like button. Share it wherever you can. I really appreciate the comments, super chats, and so on. So blessings, my people, and I will see you again soon. Keep watching the videos. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell before you leave. Thank you very much, my people. Blessings, blessings, blessings to all of you. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe.